All right, everybody. Now that we've talked a little bit about short-term helping, it's time to move to a sort of other type of helping. We generally don't think about this as having one particular inciting incident. It's usually something that people maintain over a long period of time. So when we think about long-term helping, most of the time, the way that is construed in research is through volunteerism. Now, there are other types of long-term helping, like long-term caregiving and things like that, but social psychologists generally focus on volunteerism as their kind of long-term helping of interest. So why study volunteerism? Well, there are lots of people that volunteer across the world, and certainly in the United States as well. Around 100 million adults in the United States do volunteer work of some kind every single year, so a big proportion of our adult able population. And if you are, taking a more cynical view of it, I guess, it also, contributes a lot economically to the United States. That a lot of labor, almost $200 billion a year, is, worth of labor is being done for no compensation. So people are giving their time to accomplish something, and it makes a pretty substantial impact. So when we study volunteering, there are really two questions that we're interested in. Why do people volunteer in the first place? So why did they start volunteering? How did they initiate it? And then once they've initiated it, when and why do they keep doing it? So people don't always continue volunteering once they've started, but many do, and there are varied reasons for why they might do that. So if we're trying to figure out what types of people volunteer, there are some different demographic things we can look at, some of which we've already covered a little bit in the first part of this section. We know in general there are people in certain groups and with certain demographic markers that are more likely to volunteer. People that are more educated, that have more income and are older, probably because for the last two at least, they might have more free time later in life, and when you're more financially comfortable and don't have to necessarily work two jobs or work as long of hours. People that are more religious tend to be more likely to volunteer, perhaps because lots of times volunteer work is organized through a religious organization, but volunteering also is often very true to the mission of different religions. And then some kind of personality level characteristics that are pretty predictive of volunteering. People that are more agreeable, kind of explains itself, and people that are more empathetic, able to kind of put themselves in other people's shoes and think about the feelings and experiences of others and take their perspectives. So stands to reason those people, unsurprisingly, are going to be more likely to help others if they can think about what others might need. And we've also talked a little bit about certain types of situations that might influence volunteering, like when people perceive some kind of big threat to the country or the world or some group they belong to. They might be more likely to give their time because they think it's needed. But people also often are brought to volunteer for personal reasons, like finding out that a loved one has a particular illness. You might be more likely to volunteer your time for a diabetes-related charity if you find out that a loved one has type 1 diabetes, or might be more likely to volunteer for an organization that deals with cancer patients if you find out that one of your parents has lung cancer, right? So personal things can definitely motivate this as well. But there are other things, obviously, and it kind of relates to an approach that we talked about previously when we talked about attitudes. We talked about the functional approach to attitudes, that attitudes do something for people, and the same attitudes can do different things for different people, and the different things even for the same people. But this is kind of the same thinking that Mark Snyder, a name that's come up a few times in this class, and some of his colleagues applied to volunteering. So there are things that people are getting out of volunteering, basically. There are motivations that lead them to do it, and those motivations, have different desires and needs associated with them. So again, just like with attitudes doing something for us, the functional approach to volunteering basically says that volunteering is not ever completely altruistic because we're doing it for these reasons that we are generally getting something out of. And different people might do the same type of volunteer work for different rewards. And people, just like with those attitudes that might satisfy different needs, one need, people might have different activities that are all contributing to the same need, and vice versa, that people might satisfy the same or multiple needs with the same activity. Like it might make them feel good and accomplish some other goal for them. So let's talk a little bit about what those functions are that might lead people to volunteer. And again, we'll talk about 5 or 6 of these, I believe, but this isn't necessarily an exhaustive list. One function that people might try to sate when they're volunteering is the values function. Maybe they see themselves as being a particularly egalitarian person or caring person, and they want to express that by volunteering. Might have something to do with a particular issue, like if climate change is a very evocative issue for you, maybe you're more likely to do climate change volunteering because you believe that it's the most important thing to act on. So values, the things that you hold dear, might motivate you to volunteer. The understanding function is a little bit different, obviously. It has to do with if you are somebody who has some kind of talent or skills that you either want to learn or you already have, volunteering might allow you to use those skills and put them to good use, or it might allow you to learn some new ones. So, Habitat for Humanity is often a very useful example for a lot of these functions, but for somebody who has carpentry skills, but they, work in an office all day, they might want to use those skills and put them to meaningful, good use by going to help build a house for somebody, even though they don't get that in their day-to-day job. Or maybe somebody isn't a handy person and they want to learn to be more handy. So they might, join Habitat for Humanity to, spend time outside and learn some useful physical skills. The enhancement function generally has to do with becoming a better or more complete or more fulfilled person. People might feel, selfish in some ways with the way they live their lives, or they might feel incomplete, and volunteering and giving back can often make people feel like they're more substantial or more of a contributor to society in some ways. The career function is something that I think comes in somewhat more specific situations that, maybe you are volunteering to get some kind of recognition or award that might set you up for, getting a job or getting a scholarship or something. Or you're not able to get a particular skill that you need with formal training on your job or a promotion that you need, so you might volunteer with some organization to get some leadership skills or to get some sort of other qualification. So using volunteering as a stepping stone to some other aspect of your life where you might need some other kind of qualification or experience. The social function, that sometimes people volunteer because they're trying to meet new people. They're trying to make some friends or, often even build relationships. So if you know that you have colleagues or coworkers or friends or peers of some other kind that volunteer at a particular place, maybe you start doing the same thing so you can get those shared experiences and build those types of relationships. Finally, the protective function. This has to do with just making oneself feel better. Maybe you just need a boost, and giving to other people makes you feel better. So you can imagine people, not necessarily having any of these other functions always served by volunteering, but one thing they might always get out of it is kind of escaping their problems and putting things in perspective, or just feeling like they are a nicer or better person by giving their time. So it might reflect back on them and kind of protect them from negative feelings by giving back. So again, these are not all mutually exclusive, obviously. You might find somebody that is serving every single one of these functions with the same act of volunteering. Somebody that, again, let's say Habitat for Humanity, it might be that they care about providing homes for people. They want to use their carpentry skills. They want to feel like a better and more complete person. They want to learn some leadership skills so they can use those in their career. Their friends do it, and they have been having other problems in their lives, so they want to not think about that and just feel better about themselves. So the same thing might serve all of these different functions for the same person, or it might just be one or two or some other combination. The one important thing about this, though, is that they all are reflecting back on the self. None of them are completely selfless or completely altruistic. They're all benefiting the person doing the volunteering. But they aren't exactly equivalent in that focus, right? So some of them are more focused on one's own well-being than others, obviously. Sorry, I got a text message from a co-author there. Okay. So they again are, they're not equivalent in self-focus like the protective and social functions and the career function. They might seem a little more subjectively selfish in a way than some of the other ones. But they all do say something about the self. But the functional approach to volunteerism basically, it predicts that if people recognize a particular opportunity that's going to serve one of these functions, then that is when they're going to start volunteering, basically. And because they might start volunteering because of this, the functional approach has been used by people that are trying to recruit people for volunteering. Just like with attitudes and attitude change, you want to match your persuasive strategy to the function that an attitude is serving for somebody. For recruiting volunteers, you want to match your appeal to people based on the type of function that you're looking to serve. So you might be able to get people that are interested in the enhancement or career function by saying volunteering is a great way to learn new things. Or if they're maybe going to be more interested in the social function, volunteering, meet new people. Career function, build your resume, learn valuable job skills. The values function, if you're a very egalitarian person, help us show people that equality is attainable. So you can see how all these different things might fit with different types of functions. So the first question we've kind of already addressed: why do people initiate volunteering? The other question about volunteering: why do people keep doing it? So the functional approach is kind of useful for this as well. Why do people, continue doing this thing that they're not getting paid for, basically? Why do they keep up with this process? So research has found that if people have their needs, those functions are being met by their volunteering, they're going to be happier with it and they're going to be less likely to quit. People that are, having especially the values function met by their volunteering needs are going to keep doing it for, even up to almost a year later. These self-focused motivations, the ones that might seem a little more selfish subjectively, maybe unsurprisingly and a little bit paradoxically, are the ones that are going to keep people doing volunteering longer. So if you really are getting something out of it, that's really going to be when we see people that continue volunteering. So even though, we might like to think that people are volunteering just to help others or maybe even do something more noble seeming, like serve that values function, it's when people are really getting something that we see them continuing. So Alan Emoto and Mark Snyder kind of formalized a lot of these ideas into something they called the volunteer process model in the early 90s. They talked about volunteering not as just initiation or maintaining. They talked about volunteering as a process, thus the name, obviously. So the three parts of this process, volunteering is predicted by the functions that it might serve for people in terms of, how it matches with their personality, the motivational functions that are relevant for them, and the different situational factors. Obviously, it's a social psychological model, so I can hardly talk about that without putting situational ideas in there, of course. During volunteering, people also have subjective experiences, right? So the way they feel about it and the social experiences they have during it, give them things to think about and reflect upon, and kind of defines the experience for them. And things actually result from volunteering too. People's attitudes might change, their behaviors might change, and they might think about social consequences too. So the kind of key part of this model basically is that volunteering is not just not a process that just starts and keeps going on its own. It is something that has a life cycle basically. And if you just think about one point in the volunteering life cycle, you're not going to get the entire picture. You need to think about it across all these different pieces. So it's important too, not just to think about the individual person, but to think about how the organization functions, and think about how that feeds back on the person, how they kind of interplay with one another. So volunteering, we've only, only been able to cover a little bit of it here because it's a very broad topic with a lot of research on it. But it's important to think about it from a lot of different angles and think about it at different levels as well. All right, I'm going to end this one here, and I'll come back to talk a little bit about, a little bit more about motivations behind helping behaviors in general.